Billionaire caught his wife shaving their maid's daughter's hair. His reaction changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. A world of wealth and power, where perfection and status rule, may seem untouchable, but for the most unlikely person, everything was about to change. The grand estate was like something out of a fairy tale: lush gardens, endless marble floors, and rooms filled with luxurious, sparkling chandeliers. At first glance, it appeared to be the ideal life. But beneath the surface, things were far from perfect. One afternoon, in the quietest of corners, a disturbing scene unfolded that would forever alter the course of a powerful family story. The billionaire, Harrison Vance, known for his sharp business mind and impeccable taste, had just returned home earlier than expected. He had no idea that this moment would reveal the secrets his eyes had long been blind to. He had always been a man of order, keeping things pristine and under control, just like the immaculate marble floors that lined the mansion. His wife, Delilah, was a woman of beauty and grace, but with an air of coldness that could send shivers down anyone's spine. She had been a constant fixture in his life, the perfect partner for a man of his stature. However, Harrison had no clue that beneath Delilah's elegant exterior, there was a darker side to her character, one that would soon come to light. On this particular day, he stepped into the home, unaware of what he was about to witness. Walking down the long corridor that led to the family room, Harrison caught sight of something that immediately stopped him in his tracks. Through the half-open door, he could see his wife, Delilah, standing over a young girl, the maid's daughter. The girl was sitting in a chair, her head lowered, and Delilah, with a look of cold amusement, was holding a pair of scissors. The sight was so surreal, it didn't register in Harrison's mind at first. It wasn't until the young girl's eyes flicked upward, filled with a mixture of fear and shame, that the weight of the situation hit him. Delilah was shaving the girl's hair. His heart raced, and a sinking feeling formed in his stomach. Harrison had seen a lot in his life, but he never imagined this. His wife, the woman he trusted, mocking the innocent child of their maid. The girl was no older than 10, with tears welling up in her eyes, as her hair fell to the floor. Harrison's breath caught in his throat as he stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. He had known Delilah to be distant, but this was something far darker. This was cruelty. What could have driven her to do such a thing? And how had he been blind to this behavior for so long? The door creaked slightly, and that small sound was enough to alert Delilah. She looked up, her expression flickering from surprise to irritation. But when she saw her husband standing there, her face fell into an expression of guilt. Or was it anger? Harrison took a step forward, his voice barely audible. "Delilah, what are you doing?" The words hung in the air, heavy with disbelief. He never imagined he would have to confront his wife like this. She stood up quickly, the scissors still in her hand, as if she were caught in an act of betrayal. "It's just a game," Delilah snapped, her voice cold and dismissive. "She's just a maid's daughter. She doesn't deserve anything better." Harrison's face flushed with a mix of anger and confusion. How had his wife come to see the world so differently? He had always considered himself a man of honor, someone who would protect the vulnerable, yet here was the woman he married, demeaning the very same people he had always respected. The weight of his next words crushed him as he finally spoke. "You've crossed a line, Delilah." Harrison couldn't believe the words were coming out of his mouth. He had always known there were differences in their perspectives, but he never expected to find himself standing in this moment, witnessing the cruelty that had been hiding right under his nose. His reaction wasn't one of anger alone. It was disbelief and profound disappointment. How had he failed to see this side of his wife? How could he have been so blind to the truth? The young girl, still trembling, stood up slowly and walked away from Delilah. The scissors, which moments ago had been instruments of ridicule, were now laid down on the table as if they had no power over the situation anymore. The story of what happened next would change everything for Harrison, Delilah, and the young girl. And little did anyone know, this was only the beginning. As Harrison stood there, The weight of the moment pressing down on him, Delilah slowly placed the scissors on the table. The tension in the room was suffocating. The young girl, still trembling, took a cautious step back, her hands brushing the strands of her now shorn hair. Harrison could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear he had seen in her every time she was forced to hide in the background of their world, unseen and unheard. But now, things were different. He couldn't ignore what he had just witnessed, and he certainly couldn't stand by as his wife showed such cruelty. Delilah, on the other hand, had a cold, calculated look on her face as if she hadn't just torn apart the innocence of a young girl. She stood there, her posture stiff, as if daring Harrison to say something. "What's the matter, Harrison?" she asked, her voice filled with a mixture of irritation and confusion. "It's just hair. It doesn't matter." Harrison felt a rush of anger flood through him. He had spent years building an empire with this woman by his side, trusting her with his business, his reputation, and his family. But now, he was questioning everything about their relationship. The woman he had married, the one he thought he knew so well, was nothing like the person he had imagined. "It's not just hair, Delilah," Harrison said, his voice steady but laced with fury. "It's about respect. You humiliated her. You disrespected her in front of all of us." Delilah's face faltered for a moment, but only briefly. She quickly regained her composure, rolling her eyes as if the situation were beneath her. "She's just a maid's daughter. She should be thankful for what she has. She doesn't deserve anything better," Delilah said dismissively. The words hit Harrison like a punch to the gut. He had heard Delilah speak like this before, but this time, it felt different. There was no remorse in her voice, no sense of guilt for what she had done. She truly believed that the maid's daughter was beneath her, and that realization hit Harrison hard. He looked at the young girl, who was still standing there, her eyes downcast, her hands clenched at her sides. Harrison had seen her grow up, watched her move quietly through their home, always keeping her distance, always invisible. But now, in this moment, she wasn't just a maid's daughter. She was a child, a person with feelings and dignity. And Harrison felt ashamed. He felt ashamed for not seeing the truth sooner, for turning a blind eye to the way Delilah had treated her, for allowing his wife to dehumanize someone so innocent. Harrison took a deep breath, steadying himself. He looked at Delilah, his eyes hardening with determination. "You've crossed a line," he said quietly, his voice filled with a calm anger. "And I can't ignore it anymore." Delilah smirked, clearly not understanding the gravity of what he was saying. "Oh, please, Harrison," she said with a scoff. "It's just a little hair. You're making a big deal out of nothing." But Harrison wasn't listening anymore. He had seen enough. His eyes shifted to the young girl, and he nodded toward the door. "Go upstairs," he said gently. "You don't have to be here." The girl hesitated for a moment, then nodded, her movements slow but deliberate. She walked past Harrison and Delilah, her head held high despite the humiliation she had just endured. Harrison couldn't help but admire her strength. She was stronger than he had ever given her credit for. Delilah watched the girl leave, her expression cold and indifferent. But Harrison was done. He turned to face his wife once again, his anger bubbling to the surface. "I can't believe you," he said, his voice rising. "I married you, trusted you, and this is how you treat people?" Delilah's face twisted into a sneer, her eyes narrowing. "You're being ridiculous, Harrison," she said, her voice laced with venom. "She's just a servant. She doesn't matter." The words stung Harrison more than he cared to admit. But he wasn't backing down. "You don't get to treat people like that," he said firmly. "Not in my house. Not in my life." Delilah's eyes flashed with anger, but Harrison could see the fear behind her eyes now. She knew, deep down, that things had changed. The world she had so carefully constructed was starting to crumble. Harrison turned and walked out of the room, leaving Delilah standing there, seething with rage and confusion. He knew what he had to do next. He couldn't let this slide. Not anymore. As Harrison walked away from Delilah, he felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. He had never imagined a day where he would find himself standing in his own home, torn between love and disgust. The house, which had always been a symbol of success and security, now felt cold and alien. He was no longer sure who he had married, nor what had become of the woman he thought he knew. But more importantly, he couldn't shake the image of the young girl, her eyes filled with fear, her dignity shattered in front of him. Harrison knew he had to do something. This moment marked a turning point, not just for his marriage, but for the way he saw his life and the people around him. He couldn't pretend anymore. As he reached his office, the door creaked as it opened. The silence in the room was deafening, but Harrison welcomed it. He needed a moment to think, to process everything that had just happened. The harsh reality of Delilah's actions hit him harder now that he was alone. He ran a hand through his hair and sat behind his desk, staring out the window at the sprawling estate. But his thoughts kept returning to the young girl, the maid's daughter. He had seen her grow up in this house, always in the background, always invisible. But not anymore. This was his opportunity to change everything. He couldn't undo what had happened, but he could make sure it never happened again. He could give the girl a voice, a chance to stand tall in a world that had always treated her like she didn't matter. Harrison sat up straighter, a sense of purpose filling him. It was time to take control. He couldn't allow Delilah's actions to go unchallenged. He couldn't let her continue to degrade the people who worked for him, people who were as much a part of his life as anyone else. But Harrison didn't want to do this alone. He needed help, someone who would understand the gravity of the situation and help him take the necessary steps to right the wrongs. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. The line rang once, then twice, before someone finally picked up. Harrison, came the voice on the other end, familiar but distant. It was Charles, his old friend and lawyer, someone Harrison trusted to handle the most delicate matters. "Charles, I need your help," Harrison said, his voice firm but with a hint of exhaustion. "It's about Delilah. I need to make some changes around here, and I need to make sure everything is done properly." "Of course, Harrison," Charles replied. "We've been through a lot together, and I know you wouldn't ask unless it was important. What's going on?" Harrison took a deep breath. "I just caught Delilah doing something unforgivable. She hurt someone, a child, in a way that I can't ignore. I'm done pretending that everything is okay. I'm going to make sure she faces the consequences." "Understood," Charles said calmly. "Let's talk about your options." As Harrison and Charles discussed the steps he needed to take, Harrison knew that he couldn't go back to the way things were. His marriage, his life, everything had changed in the span of a few minutes. And as much as it pained him, he knew that Delilah would have to be held accountable for her actions. But what did that mean for the young girl, the maid's daughter? Harrison knew that he couldn't just let her go back to living in the shadows. It wasn't enough to punish Delilah. The girl deserved better. She deserved to be seen, to be heard, to have a chance at a life beyond the walls of the estate. As the conversation with Charles continued, Harrison's mind began to work out the next steps. It wouldn't be easy, but he knew it was the right thing to do. Delilah would have to leave, but the young girl would stay. And Harrison would make sure she had everything she needed to start a new chapter in her life. This wasn't just about the pain Delilah had caused. It was about giving the maid's daughter the life she deserved. Harrison finally hung up the phone, feeling a sense of resolution settle over him. He had a plan. He knew what he had to do, and he wouldn't stop until the wrongs were righted. The young girl would never have to feel invisible again. As Harrison stood in his office, the weight of his decision pressing on him, he knew that he could not go back. He had seen the truth, and there was no turning a blind eye to it any longer. Delilah's cruelty had shattered any illusions he had about their life together. But it wasn't just about Delilah anymore. It was about the young girl who had been caught in the crossfire of a world that didn't care for her. Harrison had promised himself that he would make things right. He had already made up his mind to confront Delilah and force her to face the consequences of her actions. But that wasn't enough. He knew he couldn't let the young girl return to a life of invisibility, a life where she was nothing more than a shadow in a house full of wealth and privilege. No, she deserved more than that. She deserved a future. The next day, Harrison arranged a meeting with the young girl, her mother, and the family's lawyer, Charles. It was time to take the first step in changing everything. As he entered the room, he was struck by the difference in how he now saw things. The room, which had once felt so familiar and comforting, now seemed cold and distant. The maid's daughter sat quietly in the corner, her eyes downcast, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her mother, Abigail, stood beside her, her face a mask of worry. Harrison took a deep breath and began. "I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for what has happened," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "No one should have to go through what you've been through, especially not in this house." Abigail glanced up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also skepticism. "What are you going to do about it?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Harrison paused, the weight of her question sinking in. He had spent so much time focusing on Delilah, but now, as he looked at the mother and daughter before him, he realized that the real work was just beginning. "I'm going to make sure that this never happens again," he said, his voice resolute. "I'm going to make sure that your daughter has every opportunity she deserves. She will never be invisible in this house again." Abigail nodded, though there was a hint of doubt in her eyes. "And Delilah?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Harrison's face hardened. "Delilah will be leaving," he said, his voice filled with finality. "I'm going to make sure she faces the consequences of her actions, and I'm going to make sure that she never hurts anyone again." The young girl, who had been silent until now, looked up at Harrison, her eyes wide with hope. "What does that mean for me?" she asked quietly. Harrison smiled gently. "It means that you're going to get the life you deserve," he said, his heart swelling with pride. "You will have the chance to go to school, to follow your dreams, and to live a life that is filled with respect and dignity." The young girl's eyes shone with tears, but this time they were tears of relief, not fear. She stood up slowly, her hands still trembling, but her posture now strong and confident. Harrison could see the change in her, the spark of hope that had been hidden for so long. He had given her a chance, and she was going to take it. As the meeting came to a close, Harrison felt a sense of peace settle over him. The hardest part was over, and now it was time to rebuild. Delilah would have to face the consequences, but the young girl would rise above it all. Harrison walked out of the room with a renewed sense of purpose. He had taken the first step in changing the course of his life and the life of the young girl. There was no going back now. He was going to make sure that everything he had built would be a reflection of the values he now held dear. Values of respect, kindness, and fairness. It wasn't just about punishing Delilah. It was about building a future where the vulnerable were protected, where no one was invisible. Harrison was determined to make that future a reality, starting with the young girl who had been treated like she didn't matter. Now, she was going to matter. And so was he. The days following Harrison's decision were a whirlwind of emotions, changes, and resolutions. Delilah had packed her things and left the house, taking with her all the arrogance and cruelty that had once seemed so dominant in their lives. Harrison felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, but it wasn't just about removing Delilah from his life. It was about what came next. The young girl, now named Emma, had already begun to transform before his eyes. Her once downcast expression, filled with fear and uncertainty, had started to give way to something new: hope. Harrison had arranged for her to attend a private school, a place where her potential could be nurtured, where she could finally be herself, and where her worth would be measured not by her background, but by her intelligence, kindness, and dreams. Emma had been hesitant at first, unsure of her place in this new world. But Harrison saw the spark in her eyes, the quiet strength she had hidden for so long. The first day she walked into the school was a turning point for both of them. Harrison had arranged for the best private tutor in the city to help Emma with her studies, ensuring that she would not only catch up but excel. He knew that education was the key to breaking free from the cycle of poverty and invisibility she had been trapped in. He also made sure she had everything she needed: books, clothes, a place to call her own in the mansion. As Emma started to settle into her new life, Harrison's attention shifted to the business side of things. He couldn't ignore the fact that his empire, his company, had been built on the very same values that had allowed Delilah's behavior to go unchecked for so long. He had been blind to the way he had allowed people like Emma to be treated as less than human, to be treated as invisible. But now, things were different. Harrison made sure that his employees were treated with the respect they deserved, that their contributions were acknowledged, and that they were paid fairly for their work. He began implementing new policies in the company, ones that reflected his newfound commitment to justice and equality. He made it clear that no one, no matter their position, would be treated as inferior. Meanwhile, Emma flourished. She made friends, she excelled in her studies, and her self-esteem grew. For the first time in her life, she was not the invisible servant's daughter. She was a student, a young woman with a future full of possibilities. Harrison watched her transformation with pride, knowing that this was the life she deserved all along. One evening, as he sat in his office, Harrison received a call from Charles, his lawyer. "Harrison, there's something you need to know," Charles said. "Delilah is taking legal action against you. She's accusing you of unfairly removing her from the family business and the estate." Harrison's heart sank. He knew Delilah would fight back, but he hadn't expected her to go this far. "What's our next move?" Harrison asked, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the situation. "We'll handle it," Charles replied. "But you need to be prepared. Delilah isn't going to let this go easily." Harrison took a deep breath. He had expected this, but he wasn't going to back down. He had made the right decision, and no amount of legal threats would change that. "We'll face it head on," Harrison said, his resolve hardening. "But first, I need to make sure Emma's future is secure. No matter what happens with Delilah, Emma will never be part of this battle. She's not a pawn in our games." Charles agreed, and they discussed their strategy moving forward. Harrison knew that he had made the right choices, but the path ahead would be challenging. He would fight for his company, for Emma, and for the values that had guided him to this point. As the days passed, Harrison's resolve only grew stronger. The battles ahead would be difficult, but they would be worth it. Emma's life had already changed, and now it was time to make sure that Delilah's dark influence would never touch them again. Harrison was determined to see this through to the end, no matter the cost. The days turned into weeks, and as Harrison continued to navigate through the fallout of his decisions, he began to notice changes not only in his life, but also in the atmosphere of the entire estate. The mansion, which had once felt like a gilded cage, now seemed more like a home, a place where warmth, respect, and dignity filled the rooms. Emma was thriving in her new environment, excelling in her studies and growing more confident by the day. She had blossomed into a young woman full of promise, no longer the shy, withdrawn child she once was. Harrison could see her potential shining brighter with each passing day, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. His decision to stand up to Delilah, to make things right, was the best choice he had ever made. Meanwhile, the battle with Delilah was far from over. Her legal threats had escalated, and Harrison knew he had to be prepared for what was coming next. He spent hours meeting with Charles and strategizing, ensuring that no matter how hard Delilah fought, they would be ready. Harrison was determined not to let her tear apart the progress he had made, not for himself, but for Emma. As the months went by, Harrison began to see the true cost of Delilah's actions. The public had started to take notice of the scandal, and whispers of their broken marriage and the treatment of Emma spread through the media. Harrison had always been a private man, but now his personal life was being laid bare for the world to see. Despite the pressure, Harrison stood firm. He knew the truth, and he would not let Delilah manipulate the narrative. The more time he spent with Emma, the more he realized how much he had missed in his pursuit of wealth and success. For years, he had been consumed by business, driven by a need to build an empire. But now he understood that the true value of life wasn't in the size of his fortune or the power he wielded. It was in the people he cared about, in the relationships he had built, and in the future he could give to others. One evening, as Harrison sat in his study, he received a letter that changed everything. It was from Delilah's lawyer, stating that she was willing to settle the matter out of court, under one condition. She wanted full access to the estate and a large sum of money in exchange for dropping the lawsuit. Harrison knew this was Delilah's way of trying to regain control, to force him into a position of weakness, but he wasn't going to back down. He had fought too hard to get where he was, and he wasn't about to let her dictate the terms of his life any longer. He called Charles immediately. "We're not negotiating with her," Harrison said firmly. "She's crossed a line, and I'm not going to give her anything. It's time to end this for good." Charles agreed. "We'll take it to court, Harrison. We'll fight this all the way." The decision was made. Harrison knew the battle ahead would be long and exhausting, but he wasn't afraid. He had already won the most important battle, the one for his own integrity and for Emma's future. And as the legal fight dragged on, he watched as Emma continued to thrive, her future becoming brighter with each passing day. She had found a new sense of belonging, not just in the world around her, but within herself. She had discovered her voice, and with it, her strength. Harrison was more determined than ever to protect her, to ensure that she never had to go through what he had witnessed in the past. He knew that this fight was far from over, but he was ready. The road ahead might be difficult, but it would be worth it. Because in the end, it wasn't about money or power. It was about making things right, about giving someone the chance to rise above their circumstances, and about standing up for what truly mattered. The months that followed were filled with a mixture of tension, progress, and growth. Harrison had made it clear to Delilah that he would not back down. The court proceedings were grueling, each legal battle more draining than the last. But Harrison stood firm, knowing that he was not just fighting for his own future, but for Emma's as well. Throughout this period, Emma continued to flourish. She embraced her studies with a passion, her grades improving beyond Harrison's expectations. The private tutor he had arranged for her had become not just a teacher, but a mentor, guiding Emma with patience and dedication. Slowly but surely, Emma was growing into a confident young woman, and Harrison was there every step of the way, proud of the person she was becoming. But despite her successes, there was always a part of Emma that had been wounded by her past. The scars of being treated as invisible for so long ran deep. Harrison could see it in the quiet moments when Emma would retreat to her room, lost in thought. He knew that no amount of wealth or education could erase those memories, but he was determined to help her heal. One evening, as Harrison sat with Emma at dinner, he could see the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was still carrying the burden of her past, and Harrison knew that it was time to address it. "Emma," he said softly, "I want you to know something. You are not invisible to me. You never have been. I see you, I hear you, and I will always be here for you. No matter what happens in the future, you have a family now, and that family will always protect you." Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion. For the first time in years, she felt seen. She had spent so much of her life hiding in the shadows, trying to remain unnoticed, but in that moment, she realized that she no longer had to. Harrison had given her the freedom to be herself, and that meant everything. The next day, Harrison received a call from Charles. The legal battle with Delilah had reached a turning point. "Harrison," Charles said, his voice grim, "Delilah is not backing down. But I think we have a chance to end this once and for all. There's a settlement offer on the table. She's willing to drop everything in exchange for a substantial sum of money and a few other concessions." Harrison listened carefully, his mind racing. He knew that Delilah was a woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted, but he also knew that her demands were unreasonable. "I'm not interested in negotiating with her," Harrison replied firmly. "I've already made it clear that I'm done with her. We'll take this to court, and we'll win." Charles paused for a moment before speaking again. "Harrison, I understand your frustration, but you have to think about the bigger picture. Do you want this to drag on for years, or do you want to move on with your life? The settlement offer might be the best option." Harrison sighed, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. He knew that he could keep fighting, but at what cost? The legal battles had taken their toll on him, both mentally and physically. He had to make a choice. "Let's take the offer," Harrison said after a long pause. "But I want it to be clear that this is the end. Delilah is out of our lives, for good. I want nothing more to do with her." Charles agreed, and the settlement was finalized soon after. The legal drama was over, and Harrison could finally focus on what really mattered. His company was stable, Emma was thriving, and he had made peace with his past. The decision to stand up for Emma, to change the course of his life, had been the right one. As he looked at her that evening, her eyes filled with hope, Harrison knew that this was just the beginning. Emma had a future now, a future that was full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long while, Harrison felt that he, too, had a future where he could be the man he had always wanted to be. He had learned the most important lesson of all. True success wasn't measured by wealth or power, but by the ability to make things right, to stand up for what was just, and to create a world where everyone, no matter their past, could be seen and valued. The dust from the legal battle had finally settled, and Harrison could finally breathe. The settlement had been made, and with it, Delilah was out of his life for good. The mansion, once a place filled with tension, had become a home once again. Harrison knew that there was still work to be done, but he also knew that he had already made the most important decision of his life, standing up for what was right, not just for himself, but for Emma. As Emma continued to thrive, her self-confidence growing with each passing day, Harrison watched her become the young woman he had always hoped she would be. She was no longer the quiet, fearful girl who hid in the background. She was a force in her own right, excelling in school, making friends, and most importantly, reclaiming her voice. One day, as Harrison sat with her at the kitchen table, he saw the spark of independence in her eyes. She was talking about her future, the college she dreamed of attending, the career she wanted to pursue. Harrison smiled, proud of the woman she was becoming. He knew that the journey they had been on together had only just begun, but the future that lay ahead of her was one full of opportunity. "Dad," Emma said, looking up from her papers, "I've been thinking. I want to give back to people who've been through what I went through. I want to help kids like me, who feel like they don't matter." Harrison's heart swelled with pride. Emma had always been compassionate, but now she was channeling that compassion into something bigger than herself. She wanted to make a difference, and Harrison knew she would. "That's a beautiful dream, Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I will support you every step of the way." Emma smiled, her eyes shining with excitement. "I want to start by creating a scholarship fund for kids who need the opportunity to go to school. I don't want anyone to feel invisible again." Harrison knew that this was more than just an idea. It was Emma's way of taking her pain and turning it into something powerful, something that would help others. He was in awe of her strength and resilience. "We'll make it happen," Harrison said, his voice firm with resolve. "We'll create a legacy, a place where kids can go and know that they matter, just as you do." Over the next few months, Harrison and Emma worked together to establish the scholarship fund. They partnered with local schools and organizations to identify students who needed financial assistance, and soon the first scholarships were awarded. The impact of their work was immediate. Kids who had been overlooked, ignored, and dismissed were now given a chance to prove their worth. It was a beautiful full-circle moment for both Harrison and Emma. Harrison had built his empire on the idea of success and power, but he now realized that true success lay in helping others, in lifting those who needed it most. And Emma had found her purpose, to create a world where every child had a chance to be seen, to be heard, and to be valued. One evening, as Harrison and Emma stood together at the scholarship ceremony, watching the students accept their awards, Harrison felt a deep sense of gratitude. The pain of the past was still there, but it had been transformed into something beautiful. He had made mistakes, but now he was doing everything he could to make things right. Emma had helped him see what truly mattered in life, and together, they were building something that would outlast any of their personal struggles. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Emma said, looking up at Harrison. He nodded, his heart full. "Yes, Emma. It's just the beginning. And we're going to make a difference, one life at a time." Harrison knew that he had made the right choice all those months ago. Standing up for Emma, for what was right, had been the best decision of his life. And now, he was watching her change the world. They had both come so far, and the future was full of promise. Harrison was no longer the man he had once been, consumed by power and money. He had found a new purpose, one that was rooted in love, in justice, and in the unwavering belief that everyone deserved to be seen. He smiled as he looked at Emma, knowing that together, they would continue to create the future they had always dreamed of, a future where no one was invisible. As the years passed, Harrison and Emma continued their journey together, and the changes they had made rippled through every aspect of their lives. The scholarship fund they had created together grew beyond anything they had imagined. The impact was undeniable. The kids who had once been overlooked, who had been told they didn't matter, were now achieving great things. It was a source of pride for Harrison, but even more so for Emma. She had given them the opportunity to change their lives, to rise above their circumstances, and now, as the number of scholarships expanded, Harrison realized that the true reward of his efforts was not in the money or the recognition. It was in the knowledge that they had helped to create a better future for so many. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, had transformed into a place of warmth and activity. It was filled with laughter, conversations, and the vibrant energy of those who had been given a chance to succeed. Emma, now a young woman ready to begin her next chapter, had made it clear that she wanted to continue her studies and eventually pursue a career in social work. She wanted to be the change she had once needed, the person who would help children who were once invisible like she had been. Harrison supported her decision wholeheartedly. He knew that her journey, one of overcoming adversity and helping others, was just beginning. It was a journey that would change not only her life, but the lives of many others. One quiet evening, as Harrison sat in his study reflecting on how far they had come, he thought back to the day when he had first seen the cruelty in Delilah's actions. That moment, that decision to stand up for Emma, had changed everything. It had been the catalyst for the most significant transformation of his life. Harrison no longer measured his success by the size of his fortune or his business empire. It wasn't about the buildings, the cars, or the bank accounts. It was about the people whose lives he had touched, about the legacy he was creating for Emma and for those who had once felt invisible. Looking out the window at the vast estate, Harrison realized that everything he had once thought was important had paled in comparison to the lessons he had learned along the way. The fight with Delilah, the struggles with his own values, and the journey of seeing Emma rise above her past had all led him to this point. A point where he was not only proud of his achievements, but, more importantly, proud of the man he had become. Emma's future was no longer uncertain. She had the tools, the resources, and most importantly, the support she needed to succeed. And Harrison, now a man who had finally found balance and peace, was ready to see where her path would take her. He would be there every step of the way, as her father, as her protector, and as her biggest supporter. The mansion, once cold and lonely, now felt like a home. A home where love, respect, and kindness reigned. A home where no one was invisible, and everyone was given a chance to rise. Harrison smiled as he looked at Emma, the young woman who had come so far. They had both come so far. Together, they had built a life that was based on the values of empathy, integrity, and love. A life that was worth living. As Harrison sat back in his chair, the weight of the past lifted, and he finally felt at peace. The journey had been long, but it had been worth every step. He had found his purpose, and in doing so, had helped Emma find hers. Their legacy would live on, not in the wealth or power Harrison had once sought, but in the lives they had touched, the difference they had made, and the love they had shared.